Janis Joplin, this poor girl who'd come from a normal home and had gone to a normal school, was persecuted and tormented from the age of 5.
She grew up in the South, in Port Arthur in Texas, in the 40s, and it was a racist state, and I think she instinctively reacted against that. I think her parents had liberal views, and it's quite likely the bullying of Janis came from her expressing these liberal views in this redneck culture in which she was existing.
She started using alcohol to self-medicate from her early teens. So before she became an artist, she was already using alcohol to try and self-soothe.
She was once voted ugliest man on the campus at her college.
I didn't go to the high school prom, and
Oh, you were asked, weren't you?
no, I wasn't. They didn't think, I don't think they wanted to take me.
Janis Joplin, I think, was a very tormented character. Her primal scream, I think, was a subject of what was she screaming about?
Use me now, please, please. Come down here and use me now.
Went to San Francisco in 1963.
And she goes, I think, almost immediately to City Lights Books, which was owned by Lawrence Ferlinghetti, the great poet, and she kind of loves that existence.
And of course immersed herself in the drug culture. Started injecting heroin, took a lot of cocaine, other kind of psycho drugs, was in the music scene, started to get involved with musicians, performed at Monterey and Woodstock, terribly. Pete Townsend actually said after her performance at Woodstock, mind you, even Janis Joplin on a bad night is better than everybody else.
You know, it's just music. Music's supposed to be different than that.
I think when you look at someone like Janis Joplin, I've talked to people who worked with Janis and were close to Janis, and they all sort of say the same thing, which was, we could see she was floundering, we could see she was in trouble, but we didn't have the vocabulary that we have now. No one knew or talked about rehab or addiction. You looked at someone like that and just thought, why can't she drink a little less? Why does she have to drink a bottle of Jack Daniels? Why is she doing heroin? I wish we could stop this.
When Janis signs her record contract, she is clearly already, an alcoholic.
What is it you think young people are looking for today? 25 words or less. This is radio.
Sincerity and a good time.
Are they finding it?
I don't know about you, Daddy, but I'm fine. At least I'm having a good time.
Every pop star has an unexpected moment when they're alone. No matter what kind of entourage you have, suddenly you're in a bedroom on your own and you have a couple of hours to spend. What do you do?
If you inject heroin, the extraordinary transformation in your physiology is so dramatic that you're catapulted into a state where you momentarily are disconnected from your miserable emptiness inside.
I would have been very worried about what was going on. Anyone who's had a serious heroin addiction like that, you've got to stop it.
And towards the end, as you know, Janis took to drugs far too often and far too heavily. That is a story of tragedy repeated many times over with the 27 Club or whatever you wish to call these people.
Janis Joplin once said that she was a victim of her own insides, that there was too much feeling. And many artists, as anyone who thinks deeply about the artistic nature, have a layer of skin missing. They feel things more than other artists.
I was a painter and a sort of a recluse in high school. I've changed.
She tried to clean up, she moved back home, she started wearing a beehive and normal clothes and got engaged to some bloke, but in there she knew that this wasn't her, this wasn't Janis. Poor Janis. She got her act together, she was back recording, she was back in Hollywood. She'd checked into this motel, the Landmark. This motel was pretty near to the recording studios that she was booked into, where she was going to go in and rehearse and record and create a new album, and she had her head around it. And she decided, right, no, clean up, go and stay in a motel, stay away from these people, can't get the drugs out to me there, and I'm gonna make this album properly. Trouble was, the drugs always found Janis, and she overdosed on heroin in her hotel room.
We know that Jim Morrison was extremely rebellious against his very, very military authority. His father was an admiral and very, very strict with everything that went with that, and he found it extremely claustrophobic. Jim Morrison's parents were on record as having decided that when they brought up their children, they would not use corporal punishment, they would not hit their children. But what they did instead was a military dressing down, which involved the father standing one or more of the children in front of him and yelling at them until they were reduced to shame-ridden, quaking, crying wrecks, which is another form of violence.
Using a persona is a dangerous business if you can't control it. And of course, Jim Morrison was a prime example of, developing himself into this poet.
The significant thing for Jim Morrison seems to have been, I think at the age of 4 in New Mexico, I believe it is, they're driving somewhere with his parents and they come across an overturned truck which contained a lot of American Indians, and this is a vision that comes back to haunt Jim Morrison consistently, and it appears in some of his lyrics. America was absolutely riven in two by people in favor of the Vietnam War and by young people essentially who were appalled by the notion of it. And so the Doors, of course, personified and embodied that sense of protest, and it must have been very confusing for him that, at the times the Doors are becoming actually the biggest group in the United States. His father is in charge of an aircraft carrier bombing North Vietnam. That would suggest conflict that is unavoidable.
If you've read his biography, you know that his behavior in parties or social situations was sometimes antisocial. And he had this knack for poetic metaphors and images, and sometimes they were expressed in a commercial form, others in an artistic form like horse latitudes. But the point is that one of the reasons he was popular was because he was antisocial. And he was antisocial because he was unhappy.
Jim Morrison goes to UCLA Film School, and while he's there, discovers LSD, and in fact the first Doors songs are written during that period. The Doors at first are very druggy.
When I was a teenager, everything that Jim Morrison did was amazing to me, and his sort of nihilistic excesses. It's almost a sort of celebration of that unsustainable, thoroughly impractical way of living your life. And so I enjoy it in a way for different reasons to the reasons that I enjoyed it when I was a teenager.
And of course the women come flocking, so what do the boys do? They don't say no, do they? So tons and tons of girlfriends. At one point he had 20 paternity suits pending.
It kind of goes LSD, marijuana, booze, and then the booze is sort of topped up with heroin. The heroin starts, sort of late 60s. It's before he goes to Paris.
When he escaped to Paris for a while with his girlfriend Pamela,
he kind of flees really to Paris. But Paris is not a good place to go to if you're trying to overcome hard drug problems.
And they just got immersed in the whole drug scene in Paris.
As we learned from the film The French Connection, heroin was a big drug in France. And Paris was the sort of epicenter of the European heroin trade.
Jim Morrison was off the rails in Paris. He seemed intent on drinking himself to death. Quite quickly, actually. I think one of the extraordinary things about Morrison's very short career is how much he changed physically.
But you feel that might be deliberate as well, because maybe he wants to destroy that image of himself. But he's clearly in he's clearly in depression.
Because in 1966, 1967, it's no doubt that part of the Doors' huge appeal was the fact that he was extraordinarily good looking. Great mane of hair, very good looking man, and by all accounts, very charismatic. But by the time he died in 1971, he was a beast, and seemed to enjoy that he could bounce around bars in Saint-Germain in Paris, literally drinking himself to death. And he died of a heroin overdose, which is accidental, no more complicated than that.
You've got Brian Jones, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, all died within under 3 years of each other. This gave rise to this mythology of the 27 Club, which might have gone away, and in fact did for a while, because it was quite a long time before it happened again. Almost 25 years later, Kurt Cobain.
He's a sort of archetypal child of his age. Parents are divorced. In fact, the parents of all the members of Nirvana were divorced.
He was ashamed of the fact that his parents had gone their separate ways. He was angry with them for leaving. His mother had custody for a while, but she couldn't cope with him. And she packed him off to live with the dad, who couldn't cope with him, so he left him to be looked after by family members and friends. He started to rebel at school.
In Kurt Cobain's family, suicide was common.
Kurt Cobain, came from a family with a history of mental illness. 2 of his uncles had killed themselves by shooting themselves, and one of his great uncles had also shot himself. And we now know that trauma can run through family trees. And if it's not addressed, it can repeat itself generationally, intergenerationally.
He started drinking very heavily when he was 13. There was an old wino living in the village that they used to bribe this old guy to go in and buy drink for him.
When he's an early teenager, he comes across a boy in a forest hanging by the neck, but he would say, "Do I have the suicide gene?"
How would you define the music of Nirvana? With a twist of lemon.
Now, you've got a very handsome, very small, very frail little music fan, completely taken by punk rock and the Sex Pistols and the Beatles and the Monkees and a weird sort of array of musical influences.
I think that Nevermind is kind of a brilliant, and it's a rock album, but it's also a brilliant pop album. Those songs are just gorgeous. They are just perfect 3-minute kind of pop songs with a complete twist harmonically and with that rage and that kind of energy.
It's interesting that Kurt Cobain loved ABBA so much. They made these incredible songs that were so dense with melody, and they did them in the most boring way imaginable by just going to a small studio and just working sort of office hours, often very long office hours.
I think Kurt had been doing heroin for a long time. I think he'd been doing it before Nirvana was successful.
As I expected, before I started doing heroin, I realized that I knew it at the beginning that it would become just as boring as marijuana does, you know? Like all drugs, after a few months, it's just as boring as, you know, breathing air.
All artists have to, in order to sustain, they have to pass an initiative test. Kurt Cobain's challenge would have been to have just shifted from this kind of incredibly cathartic, raw music that he made.
Nirvana made Euphoric Misery and sang it to the world, and the world sang it back.
Kurt Cobain changed the way harmony worked for rock. You know, nobody else was doing those changes. Nobody was using those flat fives and those, you know, those amazing sequences that were just so original. And somehow he had a melodic ability to make sense of really discordant sequences.
The success, the material success that Nirvana enjoyed certainly allowed him to, you know, to destroy on a grand scale, both himself and, you know, in terms of cultural destruction. I interviewed him, I asked him, you know, what are your hopes for the next decade? And he said, I want to debase every known form of popular music that ever existed.
I think he was very ambivalent about his status as it was, and the bigger he became, the more he tried to neutralize his guilt about being a kind of corporate rock star.
I think he was a very conflicted individual. He wanted it both ways. He wanted to be rich and famous. He wanted to be successful, but also he wanted it to appear like he hadn't had anything to do with it. He wanted to maintain the credibility within the artistic community from which he sprung.
Punk rock should mean freedom, liking and accepting anything that you like, playing whatever you want, as sloppy as you want, as long as it's good and it has passion.
In Utero, the final Nirvana album, which was produced by Steve Albini, and Steve Albini is very much the producer you go to if you want to kind of prove to the wider world that you're no longer a corporate whore.
He gets involved with Courtney Love. She's a very intelligent woman, but difficult with her own demons. But she's trying to get him to clean up.
So he really did set off on a path to be a decent parent, put himself into rehab, but couldn't stick to it.
He goes back to Seattle, the part where you go to get heroin and hookers, and Kurt really can't like this world.
Tonight, word of an untimely death. Kurt Cobain was the lead singer of the group Nirvana. Their albums were bestsellers, their songs filled with images of despair and violence. One lyric, "The sun is gone, but I have a light, the day is done, but I'm having fun." And then this morning, his body found at home, another casualty of success.
He couldn't handle it because he wasn't equipped to. He didn't have any infrastructure, there was no support system. His girlfriend was a wife, she was as addicted as he was. So there was nothing to cling to, there was no link for him, there was no yardstick to measure himself by.
It was obvious this man is dead from a shotgun wound to the head. Now, there was a suicide note left inside the house.
I was really shocked when I saw the front page of The Independent reporting the death of Kurt Cobain. Why was I shocked? Because it was on the front page. He'd only had one big hit. But he had become such a totemic person, such a symbol for his generation, that to these people, it didn't matter that he hadn't had more than one big album.
I had sort of admired him, and I really like Nirvana, and I think it's a real shame that he did it.
Everybody is real upset about it, and it's a shock. We can't understand, we can't believe that it happened. It's unbelievable.
Kurt Cobain actually invented a whole new style of guitar playing, in a sense. The guitar inversions on the chords are brilliant. And he, you know, he was almost as influential as the Stones and Beatles in many ways.
I was quite amazed because I was used to people having an impact in their death who had had major catalogs, ranging from Bing Crosby to Elvis Presley. But no, this was the ultimate proof that in pop music we had now reached the stage where you could have one giant record, and people take you as seriously as they would someone who has had 10 years of hits.
And his mother, Wendy, when he died, she gave an interview to a local paper and she said, he's gone and joined that stupid club. I told him not to join that stupid club, which was taken to mean the 27 Club. But in fact, what she really meant was the uncles who'd committed suicide. So the press really got hold of this, and the whole myth of the 27 Club exploded all over again.
The person who a record company tried to save but failed was Amy Winehouse. Because you know that Lucian Grange spoke to her and sent her to the West Indies to get it together.
People were talking about Amy's problems, and I know the head of Island Records was thinking, we'll drop her just so she can sort herself out. But it's too much of her. I mean, back to back sold millions. Are you going to drop your major talent?
If you really sort of scratch the surface of the lip service given to, of course, we want to help our artists and we don't want them to be unhappy or drug addicted. You know, I think you do find that there is some investment in chaos. There is some investment in the car crash narrative.
Prescription drugs. No, what makes me crazy? Alcohol doesn't do nice things to me. I'm quite a horrible drunk. Quite a horrible drunk, actually.
She was fascinating because she was imploding.
When she stood on that stage with a microphone in front of 50,000 people at the Isle of Wight Festival, she was exposed, she was frail, and she was amazing because of all the different emotional contexts that happened to her experience. The pain that Amy was suffering, and whether it's the alcohol issues or the substance issues or the environmental issues, whatever her issues, specific issues were that day or as she was performing, that's what made her great.
Amy was the apple of her dad's eye. Her father, Mitch, the cab driver, the East London Jewish family, mother, a chemist.
Amy's angst obviously stems from when her mum and dad split up, because it was this happy little girl. She was just sitting there listening to her dad's records, and Dad would pick her up, and the grandma she was very close to. This lovely little Jewish sort of family going on, no cares in the world.
She adored her dad, but her dad was cheating on her mom. And so therefore it must be Amy's fault. She couldn't work out that this was for any other reason than that something she had done wrong.
There was no slow burner with Amy. She just sort of burst onto the scene.
Every so often somebody comes along like an Amy Winehouse who is truly talented.
By the time it got to Back to Black in 2006, she'd found the voice. She was angry, she was reacting. She knew that she had to loathe her father for what he was doing to her mother. She's known throughout the world by this time for 20-odd songs.
And she obviously had an addictive personality. Starts off on drink, then goes to weed, then went on to coke.
She's in pain, she's hurt, comes out in all her songs, but she's part of her age and part of her culture. She kind of she really enjoys going out and getting off her head.
She tangled her hair up in this terrible, ugly beehive. She had herself tattooed. She was showing all the signs of self-harm. And what is self-harm but self-loathing?
The well-publicised problems around the tragic early death of Amy Winehouse has certainly made everybody kind of sit up and think, okay, we really need to be doing more.
The extent to which she was in the public eye, I think, was quite unprecedented. We kind of forget now. So there's a certain amount of, you might think, it's sort of death by, celebrity culture.
The thing that made Amy's life different was that she was doing all this in the information age. So every breath she took, every drug she overdosed on, every bottle of wine she consumed was splashed all over the front pages and on people's blogs. She never stood a chance.
I mean, I had some pretty
pretty horrific times when I first started with the press. I had a very bad relationship with the press for a very long time. And by having Asperger's, I often said the wrong things at the wrong time, and I couldn't understand them. And it was all a nightmare, for quite a few years.
Because as soon as you're out there now. There's no hiding from it, You either are this person, there is no kind of mystique. There's a camera everywhere.
That Belgrade show was the one when the footage from that went viral. That's when people just thought, this is a car crash. So if you're her father or her mother, her so-called friends, would you have let your daughter walk out on that stage?
I have hosted the Ivor Novello Awards for 29 years. The saddest event in those 29 years was watching the deterioration of Amy Winehouse, who won 3 years in a row. In the first year, she goes up on stage and she's perky and young and this is so exciting, and it's your typical what you want to see pop star reaction to being honored by her peers, her fellow writers. Second year, she gets up there, she's a little hazy, she's not all together, but yeah, she's still happy. Third year, her name is announced, and she's not there yet. Now this is a lunchtime awards ceremony. Her name would have been called at around 2:30, but she hadn't gotten it together yet.
She may not have been at the glitzy luncheon, but all talk was on Amy Winehouse, who's leading the pack with an impressive 3 nominations.
And I thought, man, if you're so messed up that you can't even get somewhere by 2:30, you're in deep trouble. And I thought, oh my God, unless somebody stops this, it's over.
I don't know what I'm doing up here, but Amy unfortunately couldn't make it, but she is getting better.
And she said to her dad, I need to get away from this. I want to go on holiday. Can we just go on holiday, just you and me, Dad? So he said, yeah, we'll go to the Caribbean. They booked a holiday, just the two of them. He brought a film crew, and she was horrified when they rocked up. He turned up with a film crew. And she said, well, what are they doing here? And he said, well, I thought we might just do a sort of at home with Amy on holiday. She said, but that's not what I wanted. I wanted to leave it all behind, and I just wanted to have some time with you. And even on holiday, that time, she never got.
I think when Amy had reached that sort of state where everyone could see how she was, it just took anyone just to step in.
She was let down by her family, by the people around her, possibly by the record company, and she didn't appear to be very good at making good choices, so I think she is the one who slipped through the net.
Amy was more than 5 times the legal drink-drive limit when she died, as the coroner at the inquest into her death recorded a verdict of misadventure.
Yeah, I think her dad, Mitch Winehouse does have a part to play, because it was almost like he was looking to launch his career on the back of Amy, which he did.
Instead of looking at these pictures of his daughter, with the blood seeping through the ballet shoes and the self-harming going on, and thinking, Amy needs me, I owe her, I'm her father, I need to save her from this. What does he do? Launches a music career. Decides to fulfill his lifelong dream of being a quasi-Frank Sinatra.
She was supposed to have these minders that were to keep her away from it. But then she'd be alone in a room with a mobile phone.
She was in a weird kind of marriage, or wasn't it a marriage? Nobody really knows about that relationship.
What can we learn from the deterioration of Amy Winehouse? Well, one thing is, it's hard to stop somebody when they're on the way down, because you don't control their heart, their mind. Their emotions are their own.
Before her 28th birthday, she'd poisoned herself with alcohol, and she died.
Of her old friends and the record company was not enough to stop the deterioration of someone who suddenly could afford every vice.
Why weren't people looking after her? She had a minder. Why wasn't somebody watching what she was consuming?
No one is really looking after them. Why weren't people really keeping an eye on them? I mean, Amy, she's got the bodyguard outside her door, and she's inside dying.